Now this quick tip is a little different in that it's a continuation of the previous quick tip, which was 454, where I was showing you the basics of blocking in for a trompe-l'oeil painting. So if you watched the previous quick tip, 454, then you got that explanation. In essence, what we were doing is we're creating a painting that is so presented that it feels that you could reach into it and reach and actually touch the objects, making them really feel three-dimensional. Unlike other methods of painting, the block-in portion of a trompe-l'oeil painting actually is more like a refinement would be in expressive painting. So what we have here is we have a block-in that we can now refine, and when we've reached this stage of the block-in, the first thing we need to do is to look at what we have and compare it with what we're working from. Now the thing I noticed first here in this one is that I have my shape too round. This is more of an oval shape. So I was a little bit off on the edges there. Now the way to correct that is from the outside in, using the same colors as I used here for the negative space. So let's do that first. Now I'll be very, very careful, and what I'll do is I'll start in the outside and I'll just push in that shape. Be sure I have enough paint. The thing is, you all the way through is to keep that paint smooth, so we can't pick up gobs and gobs of paint. The best way to pick it up is from the edges of the paint, like I'm doing right here, the edge of the pile of the paint. Do the mixing below here and have the brush loaded so that it's smooth. It looks smooth. You don't see any buildup of paint on the brush. So now that I've got that color, I'm going to very carefully now, very carefully move in and reshape. And I've got to be sure I keep my eye on that original shape as I move in and reshape it from the outside. Push in a little bit here and come down, come down. Requires a lot of control. And you get that shape, and then I need to get rid of the brush strokes. We don't show any brush strokes when we're doing this particular technique of painting, trompe-l'oeil. So let's get those smooth. I seem to have kind of a shaky hand today, and that's not that is not in my favor if my hand is shaky. So let me just see if I can get a little bit more control on that edge there. There we go. So in doing that, I managed also to sort of blend those edges a bit. All right, so that is pretty close to what I'm seeing here. Tilts a little bit more inward down here. Okay. Now, it's a plus if we could get the edges blended as we're doing that, because the edges do need to be blended in order to create that atmosphere, or the sense of atmosphere. It's in space. It's not cut out and pasted on, but in space. Again, going back and creating my mixtures and pulling the paint down, being sure the paint is flat on the brush. And I'll do a similar thing on this side where I move in and reshape. Now, if you're doing complete still life, you want to check all of your shapes and check them against your reference, whatever you're looking at, and get those shapes as close as you can to what you're seeing in the reference. All right, and be sure that all those brush strokes are gone. Okay, now that then also gives me the opportunity for keeping those edges blended. All right, now that's not, I could get that closer, but I'm going to settle for this because I want to go ahead now. The next thing is to look for what else we need to do within the colors. And that means being aware of whether we're working in the shadow area or whether we're working in the light area. So I'm going to work in the shadow area first. I see some subtle things going on. And we see we already worked in that little bit of red violet that we see popping through, but we need more of that. We've got more red violet that's reflecting on top of that than I have that I've provided for here. So I rinse the brush out really, really good. I mean really, really good. Some people will use like different brushes for each area, but if you rinse the brush out, then be sure you thoroughly dry it. You don't want any residue of solvent left in that brush at all. And by the way, this works best wet and wet. A lot of people will use a build of glazes for this, but this particular method I'm using works best wet and wet. And so if you begin a painting and you just keep building to the point of as complete as you can get it, you're in much better shape than if you build it and let it dry and then try to rebuild that. All right, so I'm aiming for that. Now that is a more brilliant color, and so what I'll do is I'm right up here in this brilliant red violet, where I used naphtha red, which is a high saturation of a red, about as red as you can register red, and pull that. Let's see if I've got that. Let's see if I've got enough violet on there. I'll check it right here, and then using a scumble motion where the brush is relatively flat against the surface. The paint's on the back of the brush. It's relatively flat against the surface, and we just want to whisper it on. Barely touch it. Barely touch it, and place it where we see that color. And I see that color right in here. And I like to use a motion that is following the shape of the image, whatever the image is. So we could do that. Now, I'll go back with a softer brush, and this is a very soft, a natural hair, softer brush, and I'll blend that in with, it's very dry, doesn't have any paint on it. And now I'm just going to sweep it carefully, holding the brush flat against the surface, and give it a gentle, gentle touch. Very gentle, and pull it, watch what's happening, and watch how that red blends in. You see, that gives it that wonderful blend. Now, I'll need to readjust here on a little bit of the violet, and so I'm looking here, allowing this to be the guide. So I'll go back now with the brush I'm using for applying the paint. I rinsed it really good. And so you go through, I said it's a very slow process, but keeping the brush clean and dry at this stage is very important. So in here, I need to get this more blended, and I need to pick up more of that purple. And I'm going in with my palette knife here, more purple, violet, whatever we want to call it. And I'm simply going to use the red violet and ultramarine blue here to get a really wonderful dark version of that violet. Now keep working until I'm sure I have that particular violet. So violet can lean towards red, and it can lean towards blue. And that seems to lean a little bit more towards blue. So I'll just keep adding a little bit more blue into it until I get that color. Now let's try that and see if that works. Now I'll need, you see it's very much too dark right there. So I will clean off the palette knife, and to lighten it I'm going to use this red. not white. I'm going to use the red to lighten it because that will keep it, it will lighten it, but it will also help to keep it more brilliant. Have to keep the color more brilliant. All right, let's see if I've got that there. All right, now that I have put the red in there, now I can add a little white. The red keeps the white from making it chalky. And let's see, need a little bit more of the red. You really need to be absolutely exact here on the nose of exactly what you see. So you keep working these colors back and forth, but it's always better to get what you need on the palette before you apply it to the painting itself. A little bit more of the blue. Let's go a little bit more of the white. Now, let's see. That's very, very close. Very, very close. Is it close enough to that value in that color? And I'll pick up just a bit of that, not much. Again, I've got to be very, very careful. Get a clean paper towel. Pick up just a little bit more of that on the tip of the brush and whisper. Just whisper it in. I can see when I first did that, I could see that is a little bit too light. So I'll go back and add a little bit of the darker to it and just whisper it. That's better. That's much better. Now just weave that in very gently. Weave it in very gently just with the corner of the brush there. You see there? Like that. Using a stroke that moves with the image itself. Now I'm going to pull that into the negative area and get that edge more blended. Go back with my softer brush and just holding it at an angle, slight angle, barely touch it. Now, I'm going to use this, clean it, not wash it, not necessary, just pull the color out of it here. And you can see now I'm beginning to get that Trompe l'oeil. Now I'm going to continue that as I move up into the light. Continue to pull it, pulling the brush stroke towards the movement. So the egg is moving more, the egg, the shape of grape is moving more in this direction. And then the shape of the grape is moving more in this direction. And then right there at that light edge is moving more in that direction. And to give it just a very, I'm barely touching with the soft brush. But now I'm getting that softened edge, and then keep wiping, because if you don't, you're smearing the color. And keep that working like that, like that. We almost have it. We almost have it. Now I'm going to work the edge a little bit more. Work the edge a little bit more. With that gentle sweep. This is not a motion you can do slowly. Doing this sort of a little slow, picky motion won't cut it. You need to develop a rhythm. It's a good thing to know how to do gesture drawing to do this, because that gives you then the ability to use it as a rhythm. And you're using a wrist motion, a wrist and elbow motion. You're not using a finger motion so much as you're doing that movement. So just move with the shape. Let's do the same thing here. We'll just move with the shape. Oops, I picked up a little bit from the outside there, and that you have to really be careful about. But still using that same movement. There's you don't want to start wiping out and put it back in, wiping out and putting it back in. It's better to keep it smooth as you go. So that pretty much gives you that Trompe l'oeil. Now we see some little idiosyncrasies on this. We see some little tiny textures, and sometimes you'll see those, especially if the shape is a bigger shape. And so now, just to get those tiny little textures, we got to be very, very careful. What we see there on those little bitty, tiny textures there, we see the value of those textures and the color of those textures very, very close. And they're happening right here, right on the edge of what we call the terminator edge, where the shadow area meets the light area. And so to get those textures, what I'll do is to go into that same color area. So let's see, if we get that same color area, let's be sure that we're exactly matching. The important thing on this part is to match what you have here by looking at what you have there. And so what I'll do there is, I need that same value, and I need that same hue, same color, but I need that value to be a little bit, just a hair darker, right in there. All right, now I'll go with a smaller brush, a soft, smaller brush there, and what I will do is, and I better use my maul stick for this. This is, approach this very, very carefully. We'll prop the brush on the maul stick, and I'm going to very carefully just touch, just with a slightly different value. Where I see that little bit, just tiny little variation in texture. Be very sure that it's not very much lighter or darker than what you're actually seeing there. So you can just sort of scumble that in. Tiny bit of paint on the brush and sort of scumble that in. The final step when doing a trompe l'oeil is to be sure that everything is softened, that you have no semblance of brush strokes showing. And I have this very soft brush here. I call it the floppy brush. You can find those in the art supply stores. Just go in there and be sure you get a brush that's nice and floppy, but it's not coming apart. And very carefully pull that over the surface just to soften. Not too much, just a little bit, just to soften where you need the surface to soften. And I'll especially do that in that negative area, because I don't want those brush strokes showing in that negative area at all. So I think I probably have given you what you would need now to do this kind of painting, this trompe l'oeil painting. It may be something that some of you would be interested in pursuing, but you need to be patient. And I didn't mention in the first section 1 of this, I didn't mention this, but you need to know your colors, how your colors work, what colors you would use to do what to what colors. You need that control of brush, because the way you use the brushes, the angle at which you're using those brushes, and the way you're pulling those brushes or moving them on the surface, those kinds of things may require a little bit of skill building. But if you would start with something very simple like I've done here, and if you will follow these 2 quick tips, pause them, do 1 step, pause, do another step, pause, you'll be surprised at how you'll be able to build that skill, and you actually can create a painting that looks like you could reach in and grab it. Be sure and view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com, where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.